Today we're going to talk about the most important thing that affects how your quadcopter feels to fly. And you probably think I'm talking about PIDs, but I'm not. I'm talking about rates. I've got a method I've developed to try to help you find your best rates. And even if you've got rates that you're used to and you think you like, it might be worth going through this to find out if there's something you like better. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. The first thing we got to do if we're going to talk about rates is make sure that everybody's on the same page about what rates actually are. If you're an experienced pilot and you already understand what rates and expo do, there are chapter markers in the timeline below and you can skip to the next chapter. The best way to explain what rates are is to take a look here at the Betaflight rate configuration, and it shows the rate curve. And it also shows this 3D model which will emulate what our quadcopter is going to try to do when we move our sticks. And you can see that if I move the sticks, then the quadcopter will rotate on the pitch, the roll, and the yaw axis. High rates mean that you can make the quadcopter make snappy, sharp, fast movements with very little movement of your fingers. And that is fine, except it also reduces the precision with which you can fly the quad, because it is easier for you to make precise movements larger than to make very small precise movements. The goal with finding our ideal rates is going to be to find a balance between giving ourselves enough speed in the rates to make the fast, sharp movements that we want to make, while giving us enough precision to be able to control the quad precisely. Now we're going to be inputting our rates here in Betaflight as actual rates, and actual rates have three parameters: the center sensitivity, the max rate, and the expo. And I want to start by just setting the max rate to 0 and working only with the center sensitivity. That's going to be step 1 of our finding your perfect rates. I'm just going to save that. And you can see when I do that, the center sensitivity basically controls how steep the rate curve is, and the rate is completely linear. This is a straight line. It doesn't have any bend to it. So that means that if I increase this center sensitivity value to 200, I will get a steeper curve. And that number, 200, is the number of degrees per second that the quad will rotate at full stick deflection. So, for example, if I set it to 360 degrees per second and then go all the way over on the roll axis, that's 1 turn per second. 360 degrees per second, 360 degrees in a circle, 1 turn per second. And everywhere between center stick and full stick deflection will be a completely linear mapping of that deflection to the rate of travel. So, for example, if I go to exactly 50% stick deflection, I'll be going exactly 50% of 360. I'll be going 180 degrees per second. And those linear rates are very predictable and may be desirable under some circumstances, but I'm going to tell you later in the video why they may not be desirable under other circumstances. So these linear rates are where we're going to start, and we're going to start with a round number that I think will get you off on the right foot, and then we're going to adjust that number up and down based on the experience we have while we're flying. But I'm going to suggest you start with a center sensitivity of, let's say, 150 degrees per second. On all 3 axes, 150 for all 3. And we're going to save that. We're going to put the quadcopter in the air and we're going to go fly. Now with 150 degrees per second of rates, I think you're going to find that this is way slower than you may be used to if you've flown before. Let me just show you what that looks like to do a full stick roll. That is full roll left. That's as fast as the quadcopter can spin. But the point of this exercise is to find what our center stick rate should be. I'll explain that phrase a little more in just a second, but we're just going to fly around and experience it first. I want you to fly around the way that you usually do, but I don't want you to do any what I would call snap moves. So like a juicy flick where you look back suddenly. I can't demonstrate it because I don't have the rates to do it. You're not going to try to do any of those moves that require snappy, fast response. You're only going to do moves that require you to fly around, and you're going to feel whether you think this is fast enough, too fast, or too slow. So I'm going to just take my normal flight lines here as if I was doing a freestyle run, but I am not going to do any I can't do any snappy moves. And I'm going to see if I feel like it's holding me back at all. Would I like it to be a little faster? I'm having to move the sticks way more than I'm used to. But I am able to do these lines. I don't feel held back. I might could try even a little lower rate, perhaps. Can I hit this gap right here? Can I come in and hit that gap? Can I come back around and hit this gap? How tight can I make that turn? Oh, I can just crash into the... I don't think it was my rates that did that. I think it was just my bad piloting. How tight can I bring this around? Oh. So right there, I felt a little bit limited. But I almost crashed here and I needed to jump out and I didn't have the response there to do it. That's okay. That's the thing we're going to solve in the next step. We're just trying to do smooth movements. And I will say right there, that was full left roll. I would probably like that to be a little faster just for my normal movements. So we're going to bring that up just a little bit. So I'm going to land. And I'm actually going to do this in the Betaflight OSD instead of going to the screen recording. It's going to be under rate, and it's going to be 1.5. We're going to take that up from 150 to 200. By the way, if you're wondering how I'm able to use the full Betaflight OSD and menus in the DJI goggles, it's because I rooted them. You should totally do this if you possibly can. I've got a video on how to do it, and I'll link it in the video description below. If you have DJI, you absolutely have to do this. Okay, let's try 200 degrees per second. So immediately this feels better to me. I like being able to make these sharper turns without deflecting my sticks as much. It could be that that's just more what I'm used to. Let's try doing that move again where I come through here and then come around again. And see, I'm able to make that tighter. I did not hit full stick deflection. That's full stick deflection there. I'm able to bring it around pretty tight. Not as tight as I might. Oh, see, that was full stick there and I couldn't quite get out of it. But I'm fairly happy with this. I feel like I have enough ability to make sharp turns to be able to do most of the things I want to do without hitting full stick deflection. Occasionally crashing because I'm a freaking noob, but I ended up at a rate of about 200 degrees per second, and I confess I've practiced this a little bit in order to make this video go smoothly. It's probably going to take you more than just 2 tries to find what you think you like best. But you're going to do the style of flying that you normally do. So if you're flying a Cinewhoop, you're going to fly inside a house. If you're racing, you're probably going to set up some race gates and fly through the race gates. Or if you're doing freestyle, you're going to do the kind of freestyle flying you're doing except without any flicky, snappy style moves, and you're going to find a rate that seems to work for you, that lets you do everything you want to do without hitting full stick deflection, that lets you have enough responsiveness to kind of get yourself out of trouble if you start to get in a little bit of trouble, but no more. You want to be moving the sticks all the way. If you find yourself like just making little moves in the center, you need to reduce that rate and force yourself to make bigger stick movements. That's what we're trying to do. As a rule of thumb, if you're trying to do in-building Cinewhoop style stuff, you may end up between maybe 50 to 100 degrees per second. For freestyle and racing, you're probably going to be somewhere between, say, 150 and 300. And frankly, it's hard for me to imagine many people being above about 300 degrees per second if you're approaching this exercise the way that I'm suggesting, but obviously these are your rates, they're personal, and they're going to be whatever you think is best. Now that we've got the center sensitivity set the way that we want it, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start testing out the max rate. And the max rate is going to be how fast the quadcopter spins when we go to full stick deflection. And there's 2 reasons that max rate may be different from center sensitivity. Why don't we just use center sensitivity and just leave it perfectly linear and we're done? Well, if you're happy with how the quadcopter's flying, then yeah, you're done. You don't need anything else. But the reality is that oftentimes when flying, we want access to a much higher rate of turn than would be usable if we were to be perfectly linear. Like, let's say that I am a freestyle pilot and I want to do really snappy 1200 degree per second, Mr. Steele style spins. If I set the center sensitivity to 1200 degrees per second, I will have so little precision in the center stick that I will barely be able to control the quad, and it's going to be super jerky. In fact, I tried this for a previous video that I did. You want to see what it looked like? I'm just barely touching the sticks. I'm barely touching the sticks. Like the minute, the fraction of a second I can feel that I've deflected the stick, it's already moving. Let's do a full stick roll. Oh, that wasn't even full stick. So instead of having a fully linear rate, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the center sensitivity where we had it, and we're going to set the max rate to what we think we want the maximum spin to be. And for a freestyle pilot, I'm just going to go like really just bonkers. 1200 degrees per second. That's not that bonkers, but it's faster than most people would like to go. And what you're going to see is that we'll get a curve here. In the center, roughly 1/3 of the stick travel, we have the equivalent of a 200 degree per second curve. But then as we deflect the stick even more, it sort of angles up to a 1200 degree per second curve. Let's see what that looks like to fly. So now, as long as I stay relatively close to the center stick, it should feel about the same as it did when I was flying before. But if I take it to full stick deflection, it's going to go much faster. And there is going to be a part of the stick travel between about 30% deflection and maybe 60 or 70% deflection, where it is somewhere between those two. So immediately you're going to find that whereas before you could go to 50% stick deflection and you would be relatively slow in terms of what in terms of how fast the quad was rotating, now that you've changed the max rate, it's going to start getting faster sooner, and your center stick isn't going to have as much control as it did. We can tweak that, but what we're going to do is we're just going to fly it around a little and see how it feels. And what I specifically want you to do this time is look at how fast the full stick rate is and whether you feel like that's where you want it to be. For a freestyle pilot, you may want it to be super fast like this. For a racing pilot, you may not want it to be super fast like that. You may want it to be, maybe for a racing pilot, you could do some like 180s around a flag and see how fast it rotates and how far you've got to hit the stick. And what you're going to do in this part is you're going to adjust that max rate up and down to control the full stick rotation, whether that is as fast as you want it to be. An exercise I like to do is to try to do full stick taps, where I go all the way to the full stick and try and stop dead on, like I'll do a 180 or a 360, and see how precisely I can do that. It's going to take a couple tries to get the timing worked out. See, that wasn't even full stick. I didn't go full stick there. I want to hear and feel that tap as I hit the edge of the gimbal, and I want to see if I can get a consistent 180 or 360. Same thing with the pitch axis. Pitches feels like it's rotating a little slower. Maybe it takes longer to get around on the pitch axis, I'm not sure. That's no problem on pitch. Feels like roll is, well, it seems like it's rotating faster on roll than pitch. I could go back and check the footage to see if that's actually true, but it's a little bit how it feels. Now that was a max rate of 1200, which is more like something a freestyle pilot might do. A max rate between, let's say 700 and 1200 is oftentimes where freestyle pilots end up. Let's try a max rate of 700 so you can get an idea of the difference between how they fly. So here's 700 degrees per second. And you can see it's still like fast enough that it's not super slow, but it's getting down there. If you like to do moves like a Vanny roll where you look backward and you do that kind of a thing close to the ground, or if you're going to try and do rolls really close to the ground, this is about as slow as you're like gonna be able to pull off without going into the ground. And so you still get a little bit of snap, but not very much. Whereas with 1200 it was extremely snappy. On the other hand, it's much easier for me to dial in a precise 360 or 180 and to vary the speed of my rolls in the middle with this lower max rate. Okay, that's why I was flying weird. I'm missing a whole gosh darn screw. Let's go fix that real quick. Now that you've got your center sensitivity and your max rate sort of dialed in, there's a couple other tweaks that you're probably going to want to make. And the first one is going to have to do with the yaw axis. Most of the time, you don't want your quadcopter to go as fast on the yaw axis as you do on the pitch and roll axis. Now, if you know that's not true for your style of flying, then maybe that's the case. But most people who aren't going to be doing snap yaw moves as much as they are going to be doing snap, pitch, and roll moves. And the reason for that is, number one, yaw moves just don't look as good to people. And number two, the quadcopter simply can't go as fast on the yaw axis as it does on the pitch axis because it relies on counter torque from the motors and the props as opposed to actual thrust to move it in that direction. So you may think that you want to reduce your yaw max rate somewhat, and you might. But the other thing is that a lot of people find that having to deflect the stick really far on the yaw axis actually makes it harder to manage the throttle. And a lot of people prefer to actually keep their yaw stick closer to center so that they can have better throttle control. And the way that you would do that is to actually have a higher yaw rate. A higher yaw rate means that you go faster while deflecting the stick less. So this is going to be something that you're going to want to play with, but you could consider reducing your yaw max rate to what you think is a good full stick yaw spin, and then see how that feels to fly. And if that doesn't feel good to fly, bump it back up again to bring your movements closer to center stick. The other thing you're going to want to adjust is the shape of this curve. And what I mean by that is how flat is the flatter, high precision, low rate section in the center compared to how steep the full stick deflection section at the edge of the stick travel is, and how abrupt is the transition between them. So for example, if on the roll axis I take my rate, my center stick rate all the way down, you can see that there is a flatter and more precise section here in the center, but then more of an abrupt curve as it comes up here. And I can make that even more pronounced by adding in expo. In fact, expo actually just, that's all it does, is it changes the abruptness of that curve. So if I add a ton of expo, you can see that this rate profile will give me the, it'll be like I have only 10 degrees per second of rates up to almost 50% stick travel. And then suddenly, whoop, it will rapidly jump to 900 degrees per second once I get past about 50% stick travel. So by adding expo, we can change the shape of the curve to give us more center stick precision at the expense of making a less predictable transition between the low rates of the center stick and the high rates of the max rate. And as you saw there, there's two general ways I can do that. One way I can do that is to decrease the center sensitivity, and that will make small changes while leaving the general shape of the curve the same. The other thing I can do is I can add expo, and that will make much more pronounced changes, giving me a lot more center stick sensitivity and precision, but with a little less predictability. Don't be afraid to play with this. In fact, I'll show you how I would test this out. Let's give myself a ton of expo, and let's just go all the expo. I'm going to give myself all the expo. So when you have a ton of expo, what you're going to notice is that when you're near the center stick, it feels like your rates are much lower. It's going to feel like before you added the max rate. But then as you deflect, there's going to be a sudden transition to the full stick rate. And the higher the expo, the more abrupt that transition is. So watch as I deflect my stick. Now that can be really nice. In fact, I kind of like, Stingy calls them elbow rates because it's like the elbow in your arm. What that lets you do is it lets you fly with a lot of precision, deflecting your sticks quite a lot while you're here doing precise stuff. But then as you decide, I'm going to do a snap move, basically it's like flipping a switch. You just push the stick all the way over, and there you are. And then as soon as you come back past like 60% stick travel, you're back in that slow regime and have control again. And it makes for really fun way of flying. But what it can get you in trouble, because if you are trying to do a sharp move like this, I'm going to do a sharp turn. If you accidentally cross over into that, past that elbow point, it'll suddenly like dive into the turn in a way that you might not expect. I really like this style of rates though. I like to be able to go slow, fast like that. A lot, actually. I like the feel of this a lot. I feel like I could do, like, this is fine. I got precision here. We'll come through here. This is fine. All good. And then suddenly, that's what a lot of expo and a sort of non-linear rates gives you. And I'm still here, I'm just like completely moving the sticks. I have all this room to move the sticks and control the quad precisely. I don't feel like my fingers are constrained at all, having to make tiny little precise moves. I have lots of room below like 50% stick travel, maybe even a little more, and then suddenly, boom, I can do that, no problem. If I was going faster, would it get me in trouble? So this is where it'll get you in trouble. It's where you're banging the stick, trying to do sharp turns like this. You can lack precision there because you are having to go past that point and you're getting into that non-linear regime where you lack control and precision. But for the type of freestyle flying I do, it's no big deal. I like it a lot. So to recap, find your center stick rate that lets you fly around without doing any snap moves. Then, find your max rate, which is how fast you want to spin when you go to full stick deflection. Then, adjust expo to change the transition between those two sort of center stick versus full stick. Adjust yaw if you desire yaw to be a little bit different. And then finally, some people prefer to have their pitch and their roll exactly the same. If you do a lot of combination moves like Rubik's Cubes, where you'll do a half roll, full flip, half roll, and you really need the timing to be dead on, then you may want to go back and actually frame by frame look at how fast it takes to do a flip versus a roll, and you're just going to tweak your rates up or down until the quadcopter actually has those two things be the same. Why aren't they the same? Well, remember that the rates are what the quadcopter is being asked to do by the flight controller, but the distribution of weight and so forth can mean that the actual speed at which the quadcopter spins doesn't match that. There's another exercise that is worth thinking about, and that is just how fast or how slow can a human even use rates? Like, what if we took the quadcopter all the way down to the minimum of 10 degrees per second? Could you even fly it? What if we took it up to the maximum of 2,000 degrees per second? I did that, and the results were pretty eye-opening. I'll put a card on screen if you want to check that out. I'll see you there. Happy flying.